Now, I can be the kind of person that can just beat myself up. I know some of you are out there, you're totally with me. Like, I don't need anyone to do it for me and tell me how awful I am. I can do this all by myself. I can make a mistake or miss an appointment accidentally or snap at my kids or yell at my husband or just fail in some way, and I will think about it. And then I will overthink about it. And then I'll think about it some more. And then I'll probably call a friend and try and talk to them about it. And then I'll tell my therapist about it and probably journal about it. And then, of course, I'll feel guilty about it forever. I have one of those brains that wakes me up at 3 a.m. and says little things like, ding, ding, ding. Angie, do you remember that thing you did in 3rd grade that got your name put on the board with 2 check marks behind it? You remember that thing? That was a terrible thing that you did. Or, hey, do you remember that time that you were failed at that project? Or do you remember that dumb thing you said up there on stage in front of all the people? How vulnerable that was? I'm sure they're still laughing at you now. My brain will just repeat this on endless loop again and again and again. I think for most of us, we're biologically hardwired for this kind of negative self-talk. Because at one point in humans' history, what it did was keep us away from those environmental threats. Our brain would sit there and say, hey, you remember when you ate that plant that was poisoned? Do not do that again. Or do you remember when you wandered into that canyon and there were deadly snakes there? Do not do it again. And so our brain would remind us those things as a way of keeping us safe. But these days, most of the stuff that we beat ourselves up about have nothing to do with our humanity. They have nothing to do with our safety. I mean, certainly, I'm never going to do the thing that I did in 3rd grade, but got my name on the board with 2 check marks behind it ever again. So I think today's humans, we have to figure out ways to kind of release ourselves from our negative self-talk. We have to figure out ways to release ourselves and quit beating ourselves up. The truth is, we know this. We've all screwed up. We've all made mistakes. And when it comes down to it, I have seen other people make mistakes, and I have been so forgiving to those for others. But for me, it's almost like I'm not willing to spend that much grace on myself. I'll give grace in buckets full to other people, but for myself, I really sort of struggle with it. I think that's why Paul in the book of Romans put it this way. Paul said, I do not understand what I do. For what I do not want to do, but I hate what I do. You see, when we beat ourselves up, we find ourselves self-sabotaging, and sometimes we lie to ourselves. We make excuses, or we isolate from other people, or we get defensive. Sometimes when we're beating ourselves up, we don't take care of our needs, and we let our habits and our hang-ups just sort of run wild. This fear starts to make its way in, and we start replaying those mistakes, but then we don't want to, so then we tend to try and numb ourselves with something to make it so that we can stop that anxious feeling. But friends, here's the truth. This is not the way that God wants us to live at all. God wants us to quit beating ourselves up. In fact, beating ourselves up is maybe one of the least faithful things that we can do. I want you to hold on to that thought for a second. Beating ourselves up, sometimes we're holding on to things that God has already let go. Now, one of my favorite stories happens in a book from Brennan Manning called The Ragamuffin Gospel. He writes this story about this woman who was having visions of seeing Jesus, and the whole town knew that she was having these visions of seeing Jesus. And finally, it got to the point where a bishop was really curious. And so the bishop went to go visit this woman to see if she was actually like a nut job or if she was actually seeing visions of Jesus. The bishop went to the woman and she said to the woman, hey, next time you see Jesus, I want you to ask Jesus what I said in my last confession. And the woman was shocked. She was like, you want me to what? You want me to ask Jesus what you said in your last confession? So yes, that's what I want you to ask. And then as soon as you hear from Jesus, I want you to give me a call and I'll come visit. So a while went on, and then this woman had this other vision of Jesus. And she called the bishop and she said, please come. And so the bishop came and was curious and said, did you ask the question I asked you to ask? And the woman said, yeah. Said, I asked Jesus to tell me what you said in your last confession. And the bishop was curious. He leaned in, and the woman grabbed the bishop's hands and said, Bishop, these are his exact words. I can't remember. I love that story. I can't remember. So what are you holding on to that God has already let go of? And if God has already let it go, then why on earth are you still carrying it? My friends, you are not what you did. You are not what they said. You are not that thing that happened to you. You are not your mistakes. You're not your hurts. You're not the baggage you carry around. That is not for a second who you are. And this is why when God forgives us, God forgets it. Because God wants you to know the truth of who you are, that you are a forgiven, complicated, beautiful, beloved child of God. You are good and loved and wanted and seen and desired. You're not alone. So don't hold on to something that God isn't holding on to. You see, you're worth so much that God was willing to do whatever it took so you to finally stop beating yourself up. So you can see that on the cross, your slate has been wiped entirely clean. So whatever you're doing, when that thing wakes you up at 3 o'clock in the morning, I want you to proclaim over this, like, I am not this. I am a beloved child of God, and I can rest now. So quit beating yourself up.